Hey guys, Carlo from Monte Carlo 712 and or Let's Cut Foam. I want to show you guys just a quick project that I've been working on for one of my buddies, Phil. You guys might know him better as General Splatten or over at Splatten Studios. I can't remember how it came up in conversation, but Phil was saying he had this idea of a drying booth for miniatures. And I remember seeing a video way back by 5-Star Rating 22. He had actually created a vent booth. And what he did is he had a Tupperware container that he hooked up some computer fans to and had a carbon filter on one side to absorb some of the waste gases and that sort of thing. But it got me thinking, and I kind of adapted the same technique in with the computer vent fans and that kind of thing to create this really cool drying booth. Now, of course, me being the foam guy, I kind of custom cut pieces of extruded polystyrene at 1 inch, I believe, to make different tiers. And my thought was that we could sort of increase the amount of surface area that you could use throughout the whole vent booth, rather than having just these miniatures sit on the bottom. Kind of give them a little more of a steady or sturdy setting. I'll show you kind of what we did. I'll dive in on that in just 1 second. But I'm sure many of you are wondering what kind of power supply that I used. Most of the computer fans run on 12 volts, DC, 12 DC volts. And I actually had a spare power supply from an old computer or laptop or something like that, and I'll show that to you as well. But most of those power supplies will have either a 5 volt and a 12 volt. But these fans will actually run on 5 volts DC. They just run at a slower rate. So my thoughts were that we could just use both the 5 and the 12 volt DC output and have basically a high and a low power setting. And I'll show you how I wired to set that up. It's actually pretty easy, but rather than kind of doing this step by step, I'll just show you what I did. So that's kind of the skinny. Let's jump right in. And I don't know if I'm going to have a voiceover for this next part or not, but just kind of bear with me.
Here you can see the two fans that are mounted. One is on the top lid and the other one is on one of the short sides. And you can see that I've included 3 layers of 1-inch thick polystyrene. The 3 tiers have different widths to accommodate different miniatures. The deepest layer has a width of about 95 millimeters, the middle layer is about 45 millimeters, and the topmost layer is right about 28 millimeters in width. That way you can get a bunch of different sizes and different types of miniatures into the drying booth at one time. This next part has been obviously sped up, but I just wanted to show you the different types of miniatures that can fit into this booth. You'll notice that it was able to fit 2 of the monster-sized cavalry. Those are actually Mournfang cavalry from the Ogre Kingdoms, side by side into the deepest chamber. The middle tier, those are actually Ogre bases. So you can see there's enough room for them to fit on there, and you can squeeze a bunch in. And certainly, last but not least, I was able to get a giant into the booth, but the club just barely stuck out. Otherwise, all the other horsemen and everyone fit perfectly. The power supply I had on hand was able to supply both a 5 and a 12 volt output. These fans aren't much more than a half amp each, so there's more than enough power in this supply for the vent booth. This is the 4-pin connector that comes from the power supply, which would normally plug into the device. If you search your power supply, it should tell you which pin provides which voltage. Here you'll notice that pins 3 and 4 are ground or a neutral return, but pin 1 supplies 5 volts and pin 2 supplies 12 volts. All you'll need to do is strip the cabling and determine which wires correspond to pins 1 and 2, and then you're all set. Generally speaking, all of the grounds or neutral returns will go through 1 wire, so don't expect to see 4 wires within that cabling. Every fan may be wired a little bit different, but generally speaking, all of the red wires are typically positive, and black are going to be the negative or neutral return. If your fans include a yellow wire, that's probably just a ground, which is generally unnecessary. The fans will need to be attached to each other in parallel, which means that you'll have to wind together all of the positive wires and all of the negative wires. This will ensure that the same voltage is applied to each fan. If they're hooked up in series or as a daisy chain, the voltage will be split among each fan and the speeds will be much slower. Here each cable comes from each of the fans and are placed in parallel with each other, but I then attached a longer 14 gauge stranded speaker cable which will then attach to the power supply. This cable has a white line which I designated as the neutral, and it is spliced directly into the neutral wires that are on the power supply. But on the positive lead, I've attached a female bullet snap connector. And on the 5 volt and 12 volt leads from the power supply, I've attached male connectors. That way to change speeds, all you have to do is switch between the two connectors. And if everything went well, the fans should start right up.
So I actually have it plugged in right now and the fans are going. So I'll be quiet to see if you can hear it. I mean, I'm sitting right next to it and it's pretty quiet. I mean, these are, I believe, ball bearing, brushless fans, so they're pretty quiet. And overall, I was really happy with how this turned out. I kind of just started building it on the fly. And actually all the holes that I made into like this front hole and the hole to mount the different fans and that kind of thing, I actually just used my hot wire foam cutters for. So I mean, it's just a hot wire, you can use it to cut anything. Of course I probably should have used it in a better ventilated area, but what are you gonna do? But yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, you can, I wish there was some way I could show you how much air was coming out of the front of this, but you know, you have to remember that, you know, it's, they're two 80 millimeter fans. So it would be one fan at about, you know, 160 millimeters. But I think I kind of like having the smaller hole here rather than making one large one, because it does sort of force the air to cone down into one exit. I really can't feel any air escaping around the sides. I mean, maybe just a little bit at the absolute most, and there's no types of seals around here. I mean, it's just flat on. I did do a couple of things around the fans themselves, just a little bit of gap. I did just put some silicone caulk around it just to make sure all the air was forced down into the vent booth. But I did, Phil actually had the idea. I can't take credit for it. I was trying to think how to mount these actual fans, and I think I like this way the best. You know, just remember the more turbulence, the more airflow you have within the chamber, that's going to wick away more moisture from the miniatures that are trying to dry. It'll kind of pull that air away. So, you know, I was kind of thinking about having two on top forced down, but, you know, I didn't know if that was going to hit all the areas and if we were going to get the direction of airflow the way that would be ideal. I mean, you could still put it on top. I don't see why that would be a problem. But I just think that this looks pretty cool too. I mean, you have one fan blowing in from the side and then, you know, another fan coming in perpendicular to kind of, you know, jumble all that stuff up. So I think it'll work pretty well. The foam, I did actually tack the foam down. I think I meant to use liquid nails, but I accidentally grabbed a tube of silicone, so it doesn't silicone caulk. I mean, it stays fine. You know, I mean, keeping in mind it's not like you're going to be shaking the heck out of this thing. But all in all, it turned out well. I'm happy. I hope you guys like it. If anyone is interested in me making them one, just send me a personal message or just get a hold of me through hotwirefoamcutterinfo.com, and I'd be happy to make one for you. I mean, of course, I'm going to charge you, but we can just discuss pricing and that kind of stuff if you're interested. But All in all, it was a pretty good project. It was pretty fun. So I hope you guys like it. I hope it inspires you. Thanks again to Phil, General Splatten, and at Splatten Studios. I'm actually going to send him this unit. And thanks to 5-star rating 22, James. He was the one that kind of inspired me to get the ball rolling on this little drying booth here, or at least the thought of it. I mean, Phil wanted a drying booth, and anyway, you know the story. So. Like I said, all in all, I'm really happy with how it turned out. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to send me a message. Otherwise, this is Carlo signing off for Monte Carlo 712 and Let's Cut Foam.